Hello and welcome to this live podcast broadcast here from the Leeds Library as part of Leeds LitFest 2022. I'm Molly McGrath and the Projects Assistant at the Leeds Library. And I've got with me here 5 indie booksellers from Leeds and the surrounding areas. And what I think is particularly great about this panel is that it really showcases the breadth and diversity of booksellers in Leeds. No two bookshops are the same, no two will have exactly the same books on their shelves. So to start with, can you all introduce yourselves and maybe tell me a little bit about your bookshops, and then I guess briefly just a few sentences about how you got into bookselling to begin with. So if we start with you, Andy.
Hi, I'm Andy. I co-own Colours May Vary, which for 9 years we opened in 2012 as a Munro House on Duke Street. We've recently relocated to the Corn Exchange, so we're in there, and it's been going really well. My history is in libraries. I've worked 20 years as a librarian and was doing that alongside the shop. And my partner's passion was product design. So our shop sells both books and a lot of product. So we kind of divide and conquer there. So I do the books and magazines. Becky, my partner, does all the kind of stationery and homeware, stuff like that. Yeah, so it's our 10th year this year. So
congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm Amanda. I run Truman Books in Farsley and West Leeds. We're new. We opened in June. We're a general bookshop and cafe. We do coffee and cake, as well as adult books, children's books. We have a quite a broad range. I don't have any background in bookselling at all. I was working in travel up until the pandemic came along and kind of killed travel off for a while. And I was made redundant and thought it felt like the year to be bold and follow a dream, and I'd always kind of wanted a bookshop, so I thought I'd give it a go. So we opened in June.
Hi, I'm Ray. So I run the Bookish Type, which is a queer independent bookshop in Leeds in the Merrion Centre. I run it with my partner Nicola, and we were inspired by other kind of queer and radical bookshops in the UK, so like Houseman's and Gay's the Word. And Leeds has got quite a vibrant queer scene, so we thought, well, why not have something here? So we started off doing bookstalls in 2019 and then opened our shop in 2020, September 2020. So we're kind of a pandemic bookshop, I always think. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Phil, owner of Philip Howard Books in Roundhay. I know you'll find it hard to believe, but I've been doing it for 27 years. Got into it on a whim, but it's been a passion. Run it with the good lady. We are small, both in stature and size of shop, but we're independent. We're general retail booksellers, and we also have a publishing company that we set up 10 years ago, which concentrates on northern culture. So I'd always walked from school into the centre of Leeds past 4 different types of Ostick's bookshop, and had this passion and drive that one day I'd like to own one, and that's how it happened.
My name's Jared. I own and run OK Comics in Leeds City Centre. It's a bookshop that specialises in comics and graphic novels. I previously worked for a national chain of comic bookshops, but as they sort of moved away from the sort of comic literature sort of stuff and into toys and like memorabilia and stuff, I was sort of a little bit disillusioned with everything, and it felt like Leeds had supported comic shops since I was a kid, and it felt like it was ready to have a dedicated shop that just sold comics and graphic novels, and we're moving into our 20th year now.
Wow, fantastic. So I guess my next question is that bookshops and independent bookshops particularly are often these quite beautiful, quite curated spaces. And they have often, very highly curated, unique book collections that you wouldn't find in a kind of chain bookstore. So how do you go about selecting the books that you sell, and how do you balance the need for both commerciality and curation?
Well, you've got to stock stuff that sells, but you've also got to stock stuff that keeps people coming back. You don't want to just sell one book to one person. You want to create a relationship with the customer and all customers, and maybe create a relationship between the customer and books, and sort of get them in the habit of sort of enjoying what you sell on a regular basis. And guess you kind of do that by becoming friends with people. It's, I mean, we're in the people industry, not just the book industry. The amount of people who walk through the door from every sort of walk of life, I feel like there's a book on our shelves for everybody, and it's just a case of getting to know people, getting to know your product, and keeping those two things, you know, connected. I don't know what everybody else thinks about it.
I largely agree. And I think because we're all independent, quite small. You're talking about a big chain. You know, a lot of those big chains are ordering centrally. You know, and your customers coming in, but we're able to be enablers or be responsive to people. So a lot of the time, people are bringing ideas of what they're reading to us over the counter. When I was working in libraries, it's great because people would be on curriculums. And I'll be there. Oh, brutalism, this is big this year. You know, folklore is really big. But I left libraries just before the pandemic. But we still have a big student base in, and they all request books, ask for stuff to be in that they've seen. You know, where you look now is so wide. You know, we're not just looking at publishers' catalog. We're looking at Instagram and social media, just looking everywhere to sort of find the things that interest you and might interest them. And I think you're always having, as Jared said, you have to have that idea of that relationship, that sort of dialogue with people in mind, you know, responding to them.
It's a full-time job in itself, I think, curating, buying the books, because you're right, you get inspiration from everywhere, from publishers, definitely from your customers, from the schools that we work with. We chat to them about what books they're going to be studying or they're going to be highlighting. Someone was in the shop on Friday, told me about this great book, so I ordered it in. That's one of the things I love about having an indie bookshop, is that I don't have to ask anybody. I can just, well, that sounds great. We should definitely have that on the shop shelves, and I'll buy something in because I love it. And the rush you get when other people love it too, it's just brilliant.
I think our strapline is guardians of knowledge, and that's how we see ourselves. Just preserve us. But the important thing is that every time you try and order a book, you've got somebody in mind who it's for. So it's range, it's diversity, but also you're only really a small proportion of what people can want and buy. So you've got to have that service function. You've got to want them to come in and order rather than necessarily find. We have never had a website. We don't want one because we need people to come in and browse and go away with a book that they perhaps didn't come in for, but have the confidence that if there's something they want, we can get it for them. If they want a recommendation, we can perhaps give it to them. And it is more that social side. I was once told that if the only books you buy are the ones that you want to read, you will be your only customer. So you've got to be aware of the fact that we're not clever enough to predict even how things are going to change. So just when you're told, oh, dragons are in, and you fill your shop full of books on dragons, it's suddenly unicorns. So you've really got to be responsive. And the greatest joy is kids coming in, seeing a range of books and telling you what they like. And that's what you've got to be responsive to.
I suppose one of the great things, though, actually about being able to kind of put your personality into the books that you choose to sell is that you can put your personality into books you choose to sell. And I read, I was reading about the London Review of Books bookshop or something, and there was a bit about kind of the art of displaying books next to each other, books that you might not necessarily think had a connection or that you might not put next to each other, so that when people are in the physical space, that it's kind of it's exciting, it's an experience where one thing will lead to something that they might not expect.
Yeah, we're not big into the psychology of selling, but sometimes you move something and you suddenly go, oh, they've all sold.
Yeah.
And you suddenly realise all you've done is move from one table to the other.
Yeah.
It might be nestling near another book that's getting interest, but it's exactly that. But I don't think if you try to write an equation about how it works.
It's a big learning process. When we first started, and it was just me in a small room, like half the size of this. And then everybody that come through the door, I could speak to them and talk to them about stuff. But then when you get like 2 or 3 people at a time and the shop's a little bit bigger, you can't converse with everybody. So you've got to do a lot more passive selling, like displaying stuff. So and display a book people might not have heard of that's similar to a book that's really popular. So people look for the popular one and see something new and interesting that's going to appeal to them.
It's a fine balance, though. We always said, me and Becky, who's my partner in the business, that we only stock things that we would want to take home. But you also need to stop things you say that sell, and there's a middle ground there somewhere. I mean, a lot of publishers do sort of a book, but there'll be a card game associated with it. And we tend not to go down that route. We want to keep things special, you know, and not sell the things which are available in every high street bookshop. And I think it's a difficult balance to try and find that, especially with social media. I mean, we talk about having a website, all these websites, you look at ours and we look at other bookshops similar ilk, and that's where they look similar. Because I think people are all looking at the same things. I think it's how you do it in your shop.
I suppose it's also a matter of, you know, you guys have been around for a while now, and you've had time to kind of build up your the knowledge of what people want and what sells and when. And I guess, do you guys find, having opened more recently, that you are already beginning to get to know your customers and what people like, and areas that are that sell more and that don't?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm very pleased that we started off doing book stalls to to test the market. We were doing them in kind of queer venues and also Leeds Market, they're like secondhand book and record fair. And that was great. And you could chat to people, you could find out what they wanted. And so when we came to do the big order, the initial order for the shop, we had a good idea of what was going to sell. And then when the pandemic hit, I mean, my partner set up a website in about 3 days. She did it so quickly. And that really helped us. So, we've kind of been through 2 lockdowns, and at that point we were like hand delivering books around Leeds, and it was great. And people really loved it, and we got a lot of feedback from that.
Yeah, fantastic. So I guess to kind of pivot a bit, how important are books as physical objects to you? So what I mean by that is does physical beauty or rarity or age or what does that add to the experience of reading a book? Might sound like a silly question to ask a bunch of independent booksellers, but I guess in that sense, do you see books and independent bookselling as part of an analog pushback against digital culture, that you're there with these amazing books, some of which that you might not find and not easy to get hold of?
I don't know, it's a pushback, it's just an alternative, isn't it?
Yeah,
Isn't that's good? That's
yeah.
okay.
I think a lot of shops embrace digital media. We have to. I think using social media platforms. We started in 2012 when Instagram was just getting off the ground, and we gained a lot of traction straight away because fewer people were using it. But it was a window onto something which is about displaying sort of beautiful things. It was an image-driven thing. I think without that, I don't think we would have got that early traction. Both of me and my partner are really into digital media as an alternative, to the books. There's nothing, having the physicality of a book as having all this sort of potential energy, really. When you get a new book, what's between those covers? It's quite thrilling, and it's always great to get new books into the shop, and it'll stop things, stop work. People just, will be looking at the new books. And but yeah, I think both should coexist.
I thought it was quite interesting looking at the numbers of people buying ebooks, which rose, as you would expect, over the lockdowns when the bookshops were closed. But then as soon as the bookshops opened again, the numbers of people, the proportions of people, the share of people buying ebooks dropped again. I think people love physical books.
Yeah.
And there's space for people who like ebooks, who like it digital, but the people who like the physical books, I don't think that's going anywhere. Well, I hope not.
I think it's more about your identity. I think you are defined by what is on your bookshelf at home, like your record collection. And there is a great pride of having a shelf full of books and people coming over and going, oh, that's what you like, and that's what you stand for. And there's something lasting about that.
Rather than them asking, well, what have you got in your hard drive these days?
and there is a place for...
It could be a tricky question.
There is a place for disposable culture, but actually the tactile and permanency of a book is something that I think that we all share in common. And if we didn't, we wouldn't do it.
I massively agree with that, because obviously I work in comics, and it's no secret people have huge comic collections, and they can vary in value, they can go up massively in value. But there's also a wave of new editions of old comics coming out. So and they're publishing in really suave, large, oversized hardback editions with slipcases and really nice items. And people who've read these books as children or over the years are buying them again, sometimes for the second or third time, but they want a better version of a book that they love because they're collecting them. They might not even read the item that they're buying most recently, but they want something permanent to keep. And you don't get that with digital. And from my point of view, comics don't translate particularly well to a digital format. It's a real struggle to sort of enjoy on a tablet the way you would reading a comic, which is quite a tactile, like personal sort of experience because you're holding it, turning the pages and everything.
And we spend so much of our life on screens that to have something that you can even take to bed every night with pages, it's just gorgeous.
And books are beautiful. And the cover designs are just stunning. And like there are books that I have to take home with me, even if I don't particularly fancy the story, because they just look so beautiful.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time stroking books in the shop.
I
So
probably
gorgeous.
pick more books to read based off their cover designs than reading the blurbs really.
Does anybody else here smell books? Anybody just like get their nose right in there?
But over lockdown, we did this thing. Well, we were involved. Something called the Book Sniffers Club. And it was getting people to smell books. When people weren't breathing properly, or with anxiety or something breathing. And so there's a website, and then people can ask, well, I can't remember off the top of my head, but people listed what came to them as they smelled a book, and it was an amazing kind of, the kind of thought processes that people use. Because sometimes they weren't usually about the book at all. They're more about how they were feeling.
And on the publishing side, when we get a book delivered, which is normally in quantity, it's that smell of ink.
Yeah.
It's glorious.
We get a lot of comments of the book smell when people come in the shop. It smells of books, it smells of coffee.
You might not want to smell these ones, they're quite old.
Yeah.
Probably give you a chest infection.
There's a word for the smell of old books as well.
Yeah. But I think that's one of the interesting things about books, particularly books that are beautiful or rare or old, is that they kind of sit halfway between a kind of an object that's beautiful in itself and original and can't be replaced, and then a medium for conveying information that's actually immaterial and has nothing to do with the kind of the physicality of the book. But I think that there's always this kind of anxiety about the future of print, and is print dying, and what's it going to do to the culture. But actually you're right, physical book sales are kind of and independent bookshops and publishing are, I feel, kind of having a resurgence and a renaissance.
We found that in the early days of digital comics, people who don't normally read comics were finding their way to them because they were watching movies and TV and stuff, and digital comics was like a natural step from that. But from there, they were finding their way through our door. They were enjoying the digital format, but just enjoying the stories and coming to find more. So we found that it really helped rather than hindered.
So, I mean, you all must have sold thousands and thousands of books over your careers. Are there any that stick out to you for whatever reason? I mean, maybe they were interesting or beautiful, or they were interesting from a bookseller's point of view, something that was so popular that you didn't understand why, or vice versa. Are there any big players that stick in your mind?
We get a book printed up especially to sell in the shop because it's so hard to get hold of. You can read it as a PDF, but that's it. So that's Stonebush Blues by Leslie Feinberg, which is like this classic kind of queer trans novel. And Leslie was a communist and didn't want anyone to make money off their work, which clearly is a nightmare for a bookseller. So we basically sell this book at cost price, making nothing from it, but it feels like a good kind of community thing to do, and it is quite an incredible novel, and people really come in to get that book.
And nice that there's that background to it and that story that you can then engage with people. And that something that would obviously never happen in a chain bookstore.
It's good that it helps the customer know how important that book is if you take the risk of printing them yourself.
Are you the only place selling it, do you think?
I think so.
That's really something.
I mean, a customer could go to the company we go to and get it printed, but it's going to cost more if they're just getting one done.
Yeah, that's really great.
Yeah, that seems like, well, you were saying it was, indie book selling was kind of a labour of love, or That sounds like definitely kind of a labour of love there.
We should do that.
Yeah.
Well, I think we all we invest in people, I think, and some of the books I've really enjoyed selling are those books that we've had some interaction with. So people have come to us through the door. We've got books for sale at the moment they've self-published, and often they're about sort of like the Leeds coffee scene or the Leeds football scene, stuff like that. But it's really nice, and yeah, again, we sell at quite a low margin. Those people give them, you know, we have that conversation. The people we know, you can't ask those sort of terms. So we usually sort of give away quite a lot of margin to people so they can sell their books and make, because you know, when you're printing a book yourself, you know, per piece, it's quite an expensive thing to do. So yeah, you have to always meet everyone sort of individually, really.
One of the things that, sorry,
I was going to say, obviously been doing this for quite a while. We did used to enjoy having a copy of Fly Fishing by J.R. It was the old Yellow Pages advert for those who were too young to remember.
Sorry.
Yeah,
so
you won't even know what the Yellow Pages is. But there was an old gentleman who used to ring an old bookstore to find if it had a copy of the book, which was one that he'd written. And it got into common culture. And being a small independent bookshop, people seemed to think it was funny to come in and say, have you got the book that he was asking for? And a small print run was done of it. And we got hold of a copy, and then when anybody asked for it, we'd take it from under the counter. We actually do. Would you like to buy it? We don't specialise in anything. We're a general bookshop, but we have a bit of a reputation for sport. So we're very, very lucky to have had some of the iconic Leeds rugby and Leeds football players. So people like John Charles, and just need to give a mention to a book by Rob Burrow that came out last year. Somebody we are quite close to. Every book has a story behind it, but his story is probably greater than most at the moment. And to have him in the shop and to have people wanting to come to see him, and the book being the reason why they were coming in, was incredibly emotional. And we were quite worried at the time it might be a bit maudlin, but actually it was glorious, cathartic for everybody. And I think that's what a book can do. There's a story behind virtually every book that's written or book sale that you make. I think the other one that comes to mind is the Times Comprehensive Atlas of the World, which is a huge book, a glorious book, a gorgeous book, arguably the greatest atlas of all. It's about the size of this table. And one snowy day, probably a January, when it's quiet and you expect nobody to be coming in. In fact, I think we'd walked in because we couldn't even drive it. A lady came in, and that was the atlas she wanted. When she saw it, she was only going to buy that atlas, and she asked if she could stay and look at it on the back table, and we made her a cup of coffee. And I think that is just the kind of thing that sticks in your mind. That's why you do it. So for all the days when you don't think enough people are coming in, that's so special. It gets you up on the morning.
It's nice that you mentioned having people come physically into the space of the bookshop, because one of the things that I've been really interested to talk to people about over the course of this festival is this idea that literature, as opposed to maybe music or theatre, doesn't really bring people together physically in the same space in the same way. It doesn't lend itself to kind of live performance or talking. So consequently, places like bookshops and in bookshops and literary events and those kinds of things have a real power in shaping the literary culture of a city and a city's literary community. So I guess my question is, what role do you think that indie bookshops have to play in the culture of a city, and what kind of events do you do you do events? Do you have people in, and what do you notice from those?
We haven't done any events for a little while, for obvious reasons, but we often have book launches and signing events, and we used to run a regular drink and draw event in a local pub, where people would just we'd take over half the pub, we'd cover all the tables with brown paper, leave crayons and felt tips everywhere, and just encourage people to sort of doodle and chat with people. I'd make sure that people who were on their own were with sat with friendly people, and to try and get everybody sort of chatting. And we've actually had people who met at these events get married.
Wow.
And it's a really sort of important thing that we need to bring back quite soon.
Yeah.
But in the shop, there's a group of guys who, and they've been meeting since they were teenagers, and they're all in their 40s now. And they come and they meet up, and they'll go for a pint. Whereas they used to go to just McDonald's, but now they go for a pint and they come in and they'll chat about comics, and it's part of their social life. It is a social hub. That all the bookshops will be the same. They'll be like a social hub. There'll be people who meet there. I'm sure everybody's got their own stories about.
Yeah, I don't think it's true to say that the consuming literature isn't a social thing. I think some of my favourite moments in the shop, we've got a tiny little cafe area, people come and have a coffee. Some of my favourite moments in the shop are when we've got two different groups of people there and they just start chatting and swapping book recommendations.
And they don't know each other.
And you know that they don't know each other. And you're like, well, my work here is done. I don't need to go and help them. They're figuring it out themselves. I love that. We do late night shopping evenings where we turn the music up a bit and we open a bottle of Prosecco and we just make it much more of a social thing. And they're just a joy because it's just people coming together and chatting and making friends and talking about books and swapping recommendations, and it's just lovely. I love doing events in the shop.
We've always done it since we opened. Our intention was to do events outside the shop to make it more. I think people can talk now about sort of immersive retail, but I think we had a space next to the shop which we had exhibitions and book signings, coffee cupping, all sorts of stuff with a lot of the local kind of traders and independent stores, and especially food and drink. But we've moved into the corn exchange. We've lost that space, but we've got an exhibition in the market at the moment with our Saturday assistant Kate. So we spoke to the market. She's got a space in there, and then she's got an exhibition in there. This week we'll Peter Mitchell, who's a photographer of Leeds, talking about his new book about Quarry Hill Flats, because that's underneath our unit in an empty unit. So we're kind of trying to use the spaces in and around nearby to carry on what we were doing before. But without that, I think it would still be great to have a bookshop that didn't do that. But I think those people you meet, and actually those people who meet each other at those events, that's been really gratifying and really important, I think.
I think bookshops should be a place of social conscience and dare I say dissent as well. They always have been, meetings of minds and a place where you felt safe to express your opinion. I think that's really important. But I think we can also take the place of service industries that have been lost. The post office isn't there anymore, the local bank, the place where people used to go and they might have drawn a pension, but they were there for 10 minutes to talk to the person behind the counter who'd asked how the dog was or whatever. I think we do that a little bit. A lot of the people that we've known for a very long time. And we'd like to hope that the environment we create for them is a welcoming one. And even if they're passing and they want to just pop in and, find out how your granddad is, that's enough. If they want to come back and order and buy a book at some point, that's great as well. Somebody's going to have a birthday and they're going to need to buy something for them. That's great. But I think we fulfill a role that used to be there by other shops, service industries. And I think the other thing is you can't survive without doing events. But we've always not only done them in the shop, we've tried to do them in libraries as often as we can. We think there's an intrinsic link between people trying books in places like libraries and then maybe coming to buy one somewhere down the line. And the same with schools. It's really difficult at the moment with schools. Clearly they've got issues of their own, even about access of people into it. But I think it's really important to take authors around to schools. That's something we've always tried to do.
That's really interesting perspective, actually, because I'd always events I kind of saw as bringing authors in and that kind of thing, this kind of two-way process of supporting local authors and giving them a platform, and then also bringing people who are known more kind of nationally into the bookshops, into Leeds. But that's actually a really interesting idea that they're part of the kind of everyday socialising of the city. I really like that.
It's important for us that our shop is a kind of quite a safe, kind of comfortable space for people, particularly for people if they're just kind of they're just coming out. And you know, a lot of queer culture in Leeds and in other cities is about nightlife, and it revolves around drinking, and it's generally aimed at younger people. So it's really important that there are spaces, queer spaces, that are open during the day, and that they are kind of intergenerational, and that they're not, you know, revolving around alcohol as well.
Yeah.
So we do loads of events, and we support lots of local book groups. So there's at least 3 local queer book clubs. It's probably more than that actually, but at least 3 I can think of. But we do things like secondhand Sundays, and we have a massive queue along like the balcony in the Marion Centre when we do secondhand Sundays. They're so popular, and people kind of chat to each other in the queue, and there's a really, really lovely environment. We do pop-up bookstores in other places. We're going to start a bookish stroll, which is like a book group on the move, which would be lovely. That's coming up soon. We do queer history walks. So we do, I feel we do a lot for the local queer community.
Fantastic. So yeah, again, I'm kind of wondering, these, you know, selling indie books is kind of, I don't know, it seems a bit like a dream job in a way, but I'm sure it's absolutely incredibly frustrating in many ways. So what are the most frustrating parts about selling books? And is there anything that you wish the sector did differently as a whole?
I am so sick of getting damaged books sent to me from publishers. Does everyone get that? It's just like, what is that about?
Every day.
I'm selling your products. I need, you know, it's kind of obvious they need to arrive in good condition.
Yeah.
So that is. Does everyone have that?
I've had to adjust my tolerance, just so I won't lose my mind.
Yeah.
It used to be if there's a slight dent, it's going back.
Oh, I'm still at that point.
Yeah,
maybe
and now it's like, and now I've learned that perhaps some of my customers are going to back these books up anyway, so they don't mind taking one with a slight dent, and so I'm a bit more sort of relaxed about what does get to the shelves. But yeah, and sometimes it's not just a slight damage; it's like the box is so badly it's smashed to pieces.
Yeah.
I find pricing really frustrating. I don't understand why, as a publisher, you would devalue your best product, which is the new books that are coming out, why you would devalue them by letting supermarkets sell them at half price. I just don't understand the pricing structure.
Should have a discussion about the net book agreement.
Yeah, and as an indie, it's frustrating when you see books for sale that are cheaper than what you can buy them for.
Yeah.
And the flip side of that is that we work really hard to differentiate our spaces and to bring extra value to the person who comes to an indie bookshop rather than buying a book off of Tesco's. But I find it frustrating.
I think it works the other way as well, that there then becomes an expectation of what a price of a book should be. So people will come in and go, is that the price on the back? And what answer do you have other than, yes, it's printed on the back? Because they're either used to the rise of the charity shop, where clearly they now think that a book is devalued to the point where it'll have some pencil mark in the inside of it, or they can negotiate because they've seen it somewhere else, or they expect that hardback price to be instantly discounted. We've never discounted a book. We'd rather not stock it than discount it.
I got an email today from a customer who was in over the weekend, and he just says, "Oh, I think you overcharged me for that book. I've just had a look online." And then he in a response to my comment, he listed all the places where you could get it cheaper, and I looked at all of them, and I looked some of them up, and I'm like, none of these are high street retailers. None of them have got the overheads. None of them like put the effort in. They just buy it in cheap, buy it in as, you know, with as big a discount as they can, sell it for pennies profit, and just make as much money by selling as many as possible. And it's, you know, that's what they do. That's not what I do. You know, and
but you persist, don't you? I mean, we know this goes on. It's been going on. We mentioned net book agreement and all this kind of, and big electronic marketplaces coming to the fore and stuff like that. I don't let it bother me particularly. I sell at cover price, and I think a lot of people come into the shop are happy to buy at that price because they want to come into a bookshop and they want to touch it. I love the bookshop in Saltaire, so I live quite near, and I'll buy books at full price. I'm not going to buy them cheaper because I like the serendipity of finding something. I like being able to browse shelves
And you want the bookshop to remain, right?
yeah,
But
absolutely.
I think the essence of what we are is the curated stock.
Yeah.
It's not the pilot high, sell it cheap mentality, but there has been occasions where you get asked that question and it can be frustrating.
I think those questions are less frequent now. I think with the initial rise of like massive online retailers who were like specifically selling books initially, if there was this, oh, your bookshops won't last much longer after this, then, and I found now that like people are against that sort of retail, that online retail, and you know they are coming back to bookshops and seeing the value in what we do.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
People will say they've kind of made a conscious decision to,
Yeah.
you know, to come into your shop and buy it.
I do a little dance every time someone says that. I looked it up online and came to buy it from you because we want you to stay.
Yeah.
I get a lot. I've been asked that a lot since we opened. That versions of, are you doing well enough to stay? Because we really want you in our village, and we know that if we want you to stay, we have to come and support you.
Which again says something about the value of a bookshop.
Yeah, 100%.
That it enhances a neighbourhood. And I think given a choice, people would rather have one than lose one. But then the onus is on us to give them the range and diversity to keep coming back.
Yeah.
Not stock the same as is in the supermarkets. It's frustrating and annoying that we haven't sold a Jamie Oliver cookbook for probably 15 years and we're not likely to ever buy one again. But we've got some great cookbooks that perhaps you won't find elsewhere. Different forms of cooking. I think the other thing, when you say what's a frustration, there is a bit of an assumption in the book trade, and I'm only speaking having been in it for a long time, that one size fits all, and that what suits a chain is the same as what we experience at the Plankton end. And actually, we don't spend enough time with each other. We don't understand what the common issues that we have. And the trade organisation is geared at, it'll give you stuff, but it's the same stuff whether you've got 10 shops or your turnover is £10 million, or you've got one shop and there's just two of you running it. And I think, and it was proposed a long time ago, that things like the Booksellers Association should have an area whereby very small indies can come together, and that should be facilitated, because none of us really got the time, but actually it would benefit us to spend an evening in each other's company and share both best practice and frustrations.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like they've ever really had the chance to do that.
We should do that anyway, though. That's one of the things on my long to-do list, was to organise a Leeds or Yorkshire bookshop
It's really
get together, so that we can go and have a coffee or have a drink. And
but you should only be able to do it if you've only
stuff.
got less than 4 employees.
Oh, well, then I wouldn't be able to do it.
You're right, though, and I think that it's the same with independent libraries. We had an independent libraries conference here that we hosted, and you know, the same thing was said, that actually when you come together, you see that a lot of the kind of issues and problems that you face are the same, and that by kind of talking about them and sharing them, you can kind of help. And I think that there's also, you know, there's things like the Northern Fiction Alliance, which are indie publishers in the north as well. So yeah, I think these kind of networks, particularly in, you know, the north of England, that's not, you know, publishing and book selling and is so London centric in the UK, that having kind of support networks and, you know, even just people to shout about the north and books and northern writers is really valuable. So I mean, with that in mind, what do you feel is kind of wonderful about Leeds as a city, and why have you kind of chosen to sell books here, in some cases for many years, and in some cases to you've only started recently, but you know, that's been quite a conscious decision, I think, that you've made to come back to Leeds?
I think I'd find it difficult to do this job anywhere else, mainly because I was brought up here and lived here all my life, and so I feel like I know a lot of people here, and working for the chain store that I worked at gave me the confidence to open a shop, because I knew a lot of people in Leeds who were already buying comics, and I knew they knew my face. So if they walk into a new comic shop, they're like, oh, I recognise this guy from wherever, because there was already a community. You know, I've been spending my own money on comics since I was like 14, 15. And then when I started working, spending all my money on comics, because there was 2 or 3 comic shops in Leeds all the time. One might close, but then another one would spring up somewhere else. And there's always been like 2 or 3. It's been the same 3 for like nearly 20 years now. And the people of Leeds are serviced really well in that way. And there is just a definite sort of community, and being part of that makes my job really easy.
Great.
Well, yeah, like I said before, for me, there is a big enough LGBT community,
Yeah.
and me and Nicola were living in Leeds anyway, and then yeah, it just seemed like the right thing to try and do. No one else was doing it, so we may as well give it a go.
I'm biased because I'm a loiner born and bred as well. I just think we're a strange breed. We're incredibly loyal, and we're incredibly passionate about people from Leeds. You know, if a band is from Leeds, we all want to hear their music, probably judge them favourably. If the World Tiddlywink champion was from Leeds, 20,000 people would follow them. And I think that translates into independent shops in the city, and hopefully we are representative of them. We share that passion, we convey that passion.
You're right, and I think I was saying before we started this that I think it says really good things about Leeds, that there's such a kind of diversity of bookshops here, and there's so many as well, and you're all here in the city. I think that's fantastic.
I think Leeds is really good for independent retail anyway. There's so many little areas, little pockets of independence around the city, like in the Corn Exchange.
Independent libraries, for
Yeah,
example.
exactly. And where we are in Thornton's Arcade, most of the shops in that arcade are independents. There's very few that have got more than one outlet, and people love supporting them. And they buy their tote bag and carry it around with pride. There's a lot of support for indies in Leeds.
Yeah. Sweet. Well, I think that we probably have to wrap it up there, sadly. I could probably keep talking to you guys for ages, but thank you so much. You guys are all, you don't have a website, but you guys are all online, aren't you?
Yeah.
And you are in Roundhay.
We do have a website for our publishing company.
Okay.
So anybody wants to check out Scratching Shed Publishing,
Wonderful.
which again is linked to the north, like you were saying, that everything is a lot London centric. We decided we'd set something up that was solely about northern culture, which again links it to Leeds and the people of the north of England. So
wonderful. Well, be sure to check these guys out and go and visit them and support your local independent bookshops. And if you want more information about the Leeds LitFest and the rest of the programme, you can find that on the website, which is www.leedslitfest.co.uk. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. That was really good. I really enjoyed that.